Okay, welcome to Origin Stories. I'm Robert Tighe, and my guest today is Glenn Marvin. Glenn, great to have you. How are you doing?
Great to be here, mate, and stoked to be part of the Origin Story series.
I should tell people a little bit about you. A lot of people out there will know you, but I should tell people who don't a little bit about you before we go any further. I asked you to send me a few lines about yourself, and you hit me with this, which is Glenn Marvin has spent his life running, initially running from himself and the world he grew up in South Auckland. He dropped out of university and spent a few years as a travelling bum, living a life full of booze and drugs. Next, he became a police officer before leaving the police for the corporate world. Ironically, he found peace within himself and success in business when he actively started running in his 30s. And in 2017, he founded Konnector, a successful digital marketing agency. You've been through some stuff, Glenn. Let's.
And you clearly polished the bio.
It's a little edit here and there, but it's you've been through some incredible stuff. So let's start at the beginning. That's what origin stories are all about. Let's start with growing up in South Auckland. How did that shape you and impact you for the years that followed, I suppose?
Yeah, well, my story is probably not that much different from many. Growing up in South Auckland, it's not exactly the most aesthetically pleasing area. Single mother. My parents separated when I was very young. I couldn't actually remember them together. So, my mother struggling with three boys to bring us up together, doing everything that she possibly could. Papakura is obviously an affordable suburb, and it was an, let's call it an interesting childhood. Got abused and not that sort of abused, but bullied quite a lot at school. Little white boy. I used to wet my pants as a kid. So, there was all sorts of things going on in my head where I had to, in essence, practice escapism right from a very...
Yeah, and you talk about it. I mean, apart from dealing with the challenges of that environment, you also talk, it's the first line in your LinkedIn profile, a near-death experience when you were 15 or 16 on the rugby field, right?
Yep. Yeah, so they were interesting playing rugby for school, just getting to the point where I thought that I could... actually be a half decent sports person and maybe make it to that top tier, and ended up getting kicked in the guts going for a pushover try and against Mount Roskill Grammar, those bastards. And the next thing I know, I wake up on the sideline, 2.5 hours for the ambulance to turn up.
Wow.
And I ended up in hospital. They nearly lost me on the operating table, and I was very, very lucky to be here today. So that for me was a good motivator, maybe for some of the wrong reasons. At that point, at that age in my life, it was like, right, I've got to make the most of every single day. But when you're young and impressionable, making the most of every single day is not necessarily doing the right things.
So you kind of cut loose and you lived for the moment rather than thinking about what was down the track. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I went to university because that was what my brothers did. I found out that I got into teachers college before my end of my first year exams. So I ended up going on a boozy road trip instead of doing my exams. Got into teachers college. There were, I think, 24 in my class in teachers college, of which half, it was a great split, 50-50 male, female. I dropped out of teachers college halfway through that first year, and there were only 3 other males left.
Wow.
When I left, there was this whole sort of scandal, the Peter Ellis scandal, and
Right.
men were looked at as potential, child sex offenders and groomers, and we were treated absolutely appallingly.
Right.
And it was just a reflection of what was going on in the media at the time, and I didn't have the time, the energy, or the inclination to put up with it.
Yeah.
So I decided to go traveling, and spent the next nearly 5 years traveling between Australia, the South Pacific, Europe, South Africa, just literally partying my ass off and living a life of excess, which as you do in your 20s.
So would you say it was a typical Kiwi OE, or was it next level? How would you describe it?
I'd hope it wasn't the typical, because if there was going to be some people that are messed up.
Yeah.
I was very, very good at finding the underbelly of society.
Okay.
And so, I lived in King's Cross for 12 months.
Right.
I had just random experiences like working on a building site, and the guy that I was working with was a heroin addict, and I, kept on finding him passed out around the corner. And it was a really, really bizarre introduction to drugs, but I think that for me was actually quite a godsend, because when you have some of your formative time in the likes of King's Cross and you see the absolute dregs of society and what those hardcore drugs can do to you, it sort of put a mental limiter on me. So I would almost, I tried almost everything. I went nearly everywhere. I did almost anything that I possibly could want to do. But I drew the line at those things that you injected into your body, because I saw just, I probably literally saved the lives of half a dozen people over the course of 12 months, going through the local park, which was just around the corner from where I lived, and seeing people overdosed. And you just sit with them and call the paramedics. And, it was a daily thing there that the paramedics would come and stab them with the adrenaline and bring them back.
That's some heavy stuff to go through in your early 20s, right?
Fun at the time, and you don't think about the consequence.
Yeah. And at what stage of this bender did you start to think about life afterwards, and what was going to come next? Was there a low point where you realised, damn, I need to get my act together here, Glenn?
Yeah, I spent nearly a year in South Africa. And most amazing country. It was in the glory days of 95, 96, just after Mandela had been elected, Rugby World Cup victory. It was an amazing time to be there. And reoccurring themes here was a life of excess, where I was working in bars and nightclubs, finishing at 3, 4 in the morning, and then carry on through until daylight, 6, 7 days a week. And I think I just got tired of it. I got tired of it. And then there was one instance where there was a mate of mine that I'd party with regularly. We were absolutely off our faces, and decided to do that stupid, fatal thing of him. He wanted to drop me back to my place, and we ended up having a car crash. He's got a scar running right across his forehead. I've got a massive scar on the top of my head.
Right.
And I don't know how we came out of it. And that was a big wake-up call. I was overstaying in the country. The police turned up. I just screamed, "I'm a bleeder! I'm a bleeder!" And just as the ambulance turned up, so they threw me in the ambulance, and I was fully expecting the police to turn up at the hospital and deport me. But I suppose at some point they must have just got busy and forgotten about us. Wow. And I was very, very lucky both to get away with my life, and not have anybody else hurt. And that was the last time I ever got into the car with anybody that's been drinking.
Right. Okay.
And that was probably the big wake up call. It was after that I think my body just turned around and said, "Stop." Yeah. And I had this little revelation of maybe it's time to go home and grow up. So I literally booked a flight, turned up at home with a couple of $100 in my pocket, got a job within 2 days, and started setting my sights on a career in the police force.
That's an interesting choice. Why the police force? Had that been something you'd been thinking about for a while, or where did that come from?
Well, I think despite the glossed over drunken debauchery for 5 years of travel and things like that, I was always the babysitter. I was always the caretaker. I was always the one that was looking out for everybody else. And my uncle was in the police force, and I have always had the utmost respect for him. And I just think it was, I have this need to give.
Okay.
And so I went in with very idealistic views of, change the world, save society, be a career police officer, and it'll be the most rewarding, fulfilling life that I can lead. But the reality is very, very different. It's still probably the job out there on the planet that I have got the utmost respect for, almost above almost anything else, with what you have to deal with. And I struggled after 7 years. 7
Right.
years of picking up dead bodies, 7 years of bureaucracy, 7 years of paperwork, 7 years of institutionalized issues where while I believed in some of the old school mentality and I thought, things were getting a little bit soft, there was still a whole lot of old school stuff that was just completely wrong. And I needed to make a choice after 7 years of staying and knowing that I would become the cynical, old, institutionalized cop that I saw around me, or going out there and trying to find a new path. And it was terrifying. I left the police thinking I had no transferable skills.
Yeah, just before we get on to that, the second incident you mentioned in your LinkedIn profile involved an incident in the police force. I don't know if you want to talk about that or how that shaped you. I mean, again, a really traumatic thing to go through, right?
No, there are so many moments like that. That particular instance is where I was first on scene in a house fire. I tried to get in through the house and clear the house. I failed. I had to get out of the house. I was overcome by smoke, and just in essence, I ended up collapsed on the ground and nearly blimmin' carked it again myself. And unfortunately, there was somebody in one of the bedrooms, and they died in the fire, smoking in bed. Don't do it, folks.
Yeah.
And again, that was another sort of tipping point for me of you go from hero to zero of you're trying to do the right thing and then you end up getting raked through the coals for putting yourself at risk.
Okay. In terms of your superior,
I can guarantee that if I'd pulled somebody out, you would have been the hero. When you haven't pulled somebody out, you're the idiot.
Okay. And that was a big wake-up call in terms of the, as you said, the old school mentality maybe, or the bureaucracy of the police force that was starting to wear you down, I guess.
Yeah, and at that point, I also had a young family. I started off my career in South Auckland, and you're young, you're stupid, you're full of adrenaline, you still love partying. You've got backup all around you, and it's a real camaraderie atmosphere. And moving to the South Island, still beautiful, amazing place, but working in rural South Canterbury, still massive drug culture, lots of alcohol, lots of rural incidents, domestic violence is rife, and you're walking into situations by yourself where there's potentially firearms, weapons, violence, and people that are addled by either drugs or alcohol. And it was, everyone's got this idyllic view of rural life, but it's honestly, as a law enforcement officer, it's probably more dangerous than working in South Auckland.
Right. Okay. So, how difficult was that decision? What age were you when you made the decision to leave the police force, and as you say, start from scratch with really not too many transferable skills?
Probably I was. I don't know the exact age. That shows my age. I can't remember how old I was when I left a job.
Yeah.
Mid-30s.
Okay, mid-30s.
Mid-30s when I left. And,
what did you consider? What were your options? What did you do?
Believe it or not, I actually dabbled in real estate.
Okay.
And I jumped out of that pretty quick because I didn't believe in the ethics at the time. Made some good quick money, but I didn't agree with what was going on around me within the industry and the way that the real estate agents, it was a backstabbing environment, and there wasn't the support that you would like to think from an employer.
Sure.
things like that. So I ended up working for a company in the private equity space, started off running one company. I actually started off as an account manager, and then fortune has it that I pretty quickly realized that all of those life skills that I'd picked up traveling and in the police of communication and being able to make a decision and being a little bit of a chameleon, so to speak, I got progressed through the company pretty quickly. And about 12 to 14 months after I started, there was a general manager's role came up, and I ended up getting offered that. And that's when I really started falling in love with the positive, proactive approach and around marketing and digital marketing and things like that. Whereas traditionally back then in that space, private equity was all about stripping cost, stripping headcount, making a business as lean as possible. So on paper, it was a big turnaround, but it would generally, those businesses would run so lean that at some point they were going to fall over unless you reinvested back into them. So it was a false economy to inflate the price to get a quick exit, and I didn't necessarily agree with that. So finding, mid 2000s, this whole Google thing, where it's like, wow, if you just spend money on this Google thing, the phone starts ringing. How bizarre.
Right. Okay.
So I started getting more and more into that, the proactive, the marketing, the understanding story, the understanding the mindset of the buyer, as much, if not more than how do I strip this company bare? Because if we can invest in growth, we don't necessarily need to create a false economy in and around the cash flow in the business.
Yeah. It's interesting you talked about the life skills that you picked up. Maybe initially when you left the police force you didn't have any transferable skills, but it's something that I find from doing this process with people. Every past experience can inform what you do now if you're aware enough of it, I think, of it, and reflect on it, right? You'll find things in your past that inadvertently, without you even knowing it, you apply in a current role, right?
I am so grateful for the time that I had in the job, and I'm so grateful for the time that I spent traveling and living life.
Yeah.
For me, they are the foundations of my education. They are the foundations behind the values that I hold in business. Wanting, if not needing, to do the right thing has cost me a lot of money over the time. There is so many opportunities where we could have chased the dollars, but it's at the expense of either the clients or somebody else. And I'm really proud of how not only myself, but how the companies that I've been involved in follow that ethos and have those values within them, because it's really important to me that we follow those values of positivity and doing the right thing and knowing when to say no. And there is no magic bullets. Things like that. What we do is it's a tough gig and it's a tough job. And with nearly 500,000 small businesses in New Zealand doing what I do, so many of them get fed bullshit day after day and sold the dream, whereas they need quite often a reality check.
Totally. You talked about that corporate exposure and the private equity side of things, and again you mentioned, I think earlier, that that started to take a toll as well, that you started to get burned out, and that corporate lifestyle again can be really intense and really, really wearing after a while.
Yeah, well, it's often said that the private equity space, it either creates thoroughbred racehorses or you're off to the knackers yard. And it was an amazing experience, and I absolutely again value that. All of these experiences that I've had have just built on each other. I can vividly remember going into my first boardroom meeting and studiously taking notes with all of these acronyms that were going and floating around the boardroom table. And I must have sat there, they were going, he's putting his heart and soul into this job already. And the reality is I had no idea what the hell they were talking about. And I was just writing down things that I could go away and look on Google and go, well, what the hell does this acronym mean? So I might have had the people skills. I certainly didn't have the commercial acumen. I've always had side hustles, and I've always, dabbled in bits and pieces and stuff like that with the entrepreneurial spirit. But that boardroom environment was a completely alien environment for me, and it's been great for me to be able to have those layers of experience, lead to where I am today, and I'm very happy. But
So,
burnout, yeah.
yeah. So how did you respond to that? Is that when you found running? Was it around that time that you found running?
Yeah. So I ran a little as a kid, and I was all right at it. I was brought up, a lot of the time on a farm. We used to spend a lot of time on a farm out in South Auckland. But when I left the police force, I was the least fit I'd been in my entire life. I've got a vivid memory of moving back to Auckland, staying with my brother and going for a run with him. And I doubt I would have got 2Ks down the road before I had to stop, turn around and walk home. And I was horrifically embarrassed. I was well over 100 kilos and miserable with how I looked and felt. And thankfully, he was part of a running group that met. It was actually, let's be honest, it was part of a drinking group that met every Tuesday, and we'd run. And just little bit by little bit, I increased the distance, and I did a half marathon, and then it was like Auckland half marathon, come off the harbour bridge, you go to finish at Victoria Park Market. There was this lady in front of me and this old guy. Honestly, I thought he was about 80 years old. And I felt terrible that I just kept on catching this guy at the aid stations, and I'd have to stop and have a drink, and he'd just carry on, moseying on, shuffling along. And this larger-than-life lady sort of was on par with him. I was like, I'm going to get you at the finish line. And lo and behold, we're coming up towards Victoria Park Market, and they both peel off. And they carry on and do the full marathon, and I'm nearly dying. And it was at that moment that I was right, next year I'm doing the marathon.
Right.
And so I did. And then I did the marathon, and then I found trail running, and I did my first ultra, which was the Kepler Ultra down in Te Anau, which is just still my most favourite race on the planet. And I'm back there again in a few weeks' time.
Great.
For my fifth. And then because I'm not built for speed, and I've got this inner need to push myself to the limit, I think that is one of the things that helped me find myself, is rather than just continually working and burning myself in a negative environment, is finding that other thing that challenged me, that was in a healthy environment with amazing, supportive people that have this culture and around them of just an undying positivity and support. And trail running, especially the trail running in the ultra community, are a completely different breed. And that I've, if it didn't save my life again, it completely transformed my view on mental well-being.
Wow, and that translated to your career as well, and decisions you made around your career and what was next. Yeah.
I got the saying that when you learn to suffer, you suffer less.
Okay.
And especially in the ultras, there are so many metaphors for being in business and in life, and you start off at a hiss and a roar, and you're so excited, and it's amazing, like this new business journey. And then you find the rhythm, and you're thinking that you're finding success, and then you run out of steam a little bit. And so, in business, you sort of hit that glass ceiling, and you don't know what to do. And then your mind and your body crashes, and then somehow you pick yourself back up again, and you find yourself on this big high, and and the longer you go in those runs, the more frequent those peaks and those troughs are, and then the higher and the lower they are as well.
Yeah.
And I think when you've done a few of them, some of those problems and those challenges that you find with people, some of those problems and those challenges that you find with business don't seem as hard.
True.
And again, I'll just come back to the people in that environment. I find that, again, probably the further you go and the longer you go and the bigger the race, the more you find people that have suffered in their personal life as well, and it's their way of dealing and coping with some of that suffering. It's how they find their release and probably their inner peace.
Yeah, right.
And it's definitely one of those things that I need to constantly work on. If I'm not breaking a sweat most days, then my mental health suffers.
Yeah.
And I find running for me is like an active form of meditation, especially if it's on a trail where you can go for 30 to 40 minutes and then you sort of, you clear your mind at that point, and then you probably get another 30 to 40 minutes of just this little utopian purple patch before your body then starts going, now you're going too far.
So did the decision, I wonder, to go out on your own and set up Konnector a few years after you got out of the venture capital side of things, did that come on the trail by any chance? Was that a running inspired kind of decision, or something that you maybe mulled over during your long runs?
The number of amazing decisions that I have made in my life that have come either on a trail or on a training run at 5 o'clock in the morning, where I've just decluttered, de-stressed, and clarity comes is incredible. And it's another reason why I have to be selfish and make time to exercise, because not only is it good for my mental health, but those that depend on me, not just at home, and I've got a beautiful family, but not just those people that depend on me at home, but those in the office, when I'm not right and mentally, then the workplace will suffer as well, because I can't be there to support them.
The decision to go out on your own and start Konnector, that was 2017, right? How daunting was that decision? Again, in your mid-40s?
I am lucky. I am also the owner or part owner of another company that I bought into in 2015.
Okay.
So that was probably the big decision. I joined that company in 2010.
Yeah.
We grew that as an employee, as the director of sales. We grew that company in 3.5 years by 25 staff. We made the Deloitte Fast 500 Asia Pacific. We sold it to an American technology company, and I went as part of that sale as key man risk, and helped embed that company in New Zealand.
Cool.
And there was 14 months there working for the American company, which again was another great learning. That was the deal breaker for me. It got to the point where I either need to go and find another exciting, challenging role.
Yeah.
Because I hired 100 staff in another 12 months.
Wow.
And that's burnout material, right?
Yeah.
Hiring 100 staff and trying to run it with there was another guy who was working with, and we were sort of trying to just supercharge this thing. So I had two choices: go and find another exciting role, or go back to rebuild that company that we'd sold this division from. Right. And thankfully, I was allowed to buy into that company and become an equal third shareholder. We grew that again, and they focused very, very much more. Surefire Search focused very much more on the medium to the enterprise side, which is again in that corporate environment. And if I'm honest, I got bored. I love thinking, I love strategy, and I love giving. And in that corporate world, you're very much not necessarily an order taker, but they've got great people that have got great strategic minds, and you are doing what you are told to get them the result they need, rather than contributing to the strategy and the ideas. So out of that boredom came the Work for Whiskey program, where I just started doing pro bono stuff for SME businesses. And I say, hey, look, I'll work with you for a month. I'll give you the strategy, I'll give you the actions that you need to take, and I will punch you in the face every week for a month. Make sure you do it, and at the end of the month, if you're comfortable, if you're happy, and you're stoked with where things are going, great, go off and fly.
Yeah.
You don't have to give me any money, but if you're happy, just buy me a bottle of whiskey, and the more happy you are, the better the bottle of whiskey. So thankfully, I've got a beautiful whiskey collection now.
Yeah.
But I did that for 3 months.
Yeah.
And at the end of that 3 months, I turned around to my two business partners and said, hey, we've got something here.
Yeah.
We've got the real ability to build a community. We've got a real ability to give back to the small business community of New Zealand and actually make an impact.
Mm.
And it's a real hard choice to go into a predominantly coaching role when you're an action taker.
Yeah.
Because not everybody is an action taker. And, if I've got one major failing, it's putting my expectations of myself on others, and I need to be a better coach in regards to understanding how people work.
Yeah.
Because all I want is the best for people, and I see all this opportunity, and I see all of this ability for them to make an impact. And I'm just take some action, just
do something.
But different people learn and take action in different ways. So we have iterated over time to not only do the coaching, but to also plug in some support services, and we are doing some things on behalf where we need to.
Yeah.
And this year we've created a marketers on demand service where, again, there's, unfortunately, with the economic situation, there's a whole lot of people and, great marketers that have been made redundant or let go, or they've been self-employed and they just haven't got the work. And so rather than going out there and, building this massive team, well, why don't we act as connectors and, find these people contract roles, and we can manage the client, manage the payroll and everything like that. And in essence, build this contract workforce that if somebody needs somebody for an hour a week or 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week, we've got this amazing network of marketers that we can plug in and have a marketer on demand.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of our future. But again, the origin story from that is coming from what people need. And at the moment, they're moving away from big agency. They want, one or two things done, and not necessarily locked into long-term commitments.
And so, it's possibly a return to your teaching roots as well, right? I mean, you went to teacher training college, so that was always there, that notion, as you said, kind of passing on knowledge and, teaching people and helping them improve.
And I'm a teacher at heart. I just love, a lot of people struggle to believe when I say that I'm actually an introvert at heart. I do this sort of stuff because as much as I love you, mate, I do this out a little bit out of necessity because it's great for the brand.
Sure.
But if I could live in a shack on the shores of Lake Wakatipu and read books and work from a laptop for the rest of my life, and just go running in the mountains, I'd be the happiest person on the planet.
Sure, absolutely.
So if you can figure out how to make that happen,
let's try and figure that out, Glenn. That would be.
You can write my you can be my ghostwriter.
I could
talk me up, buddy.
I could. I think there'd be quite a few people interested in that solution. If you can package that, Glenn, you'd have quite a few clients, I'm sure. If you had to, we talk about origin stories. It's
amazing how many people.
Yeah, go on.
I was just saying, it's amazing how many people that are natural introverts that you come across when you sort of put yourself out there. That, and that's probably one of the great things about coaching is saying, look, if I can do it, if I can put this mask on and get out there, and it's not that scary once you get used to it. Seeing the growth in people, and even myself, I'm much more comfortable talking and doing those sorts of things these days, where it terrified me before.
Totally, I can totally empathize with that. I mean, I think I've talked to you before about the fear factor of even posting a comment on LinkedIn. I mean, about 18 months ago, I think it was 18 months ago, that I did your LinkedIn course, and previous to that, I would agonize over a simple comment for maybe 20 minutes or half an hour before I'd post anything. And it's definitely just a case of exercising those muscles and posting something and you know, forgetting about what people might think or how they might react, and as you say, just taking action. And it's incredible the momentum that you can gain from doing that, right? It just snowballs.
Yeah. And I rudely interrupted you, sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm going to try and put you on the spot and ask you if you had to try and sum up one superpower, one trait, one personality trait above all else that you think has led to where you are now. What would it be? What do you think it would be?
Putting the success of others before yourself,
Okay.
because my success is built on the foundation of the success of the people that I work with. That has to be the number one thing, where if you look at an opportunity and you think, what can I get out of it every single time, then the other person is probably losing.
Do you know where that came from? Was that inspired by anybody, or was it just something that came naturally all the way through as a teenager and into your 20s?
I'm no shrink, but it probably comes down to those primary school days of getting, the crap beaten out of me and bullied for being that little white boy in South Auckland that wets his pants.
Yeah.
And going, you know what? When I see somebody that needs some help, I'm going to help them.
Yeah. That's a nice way to finish, Glenn. Anything else you want to add? Anything that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, let's finish on me wetting my pants.
It's a great way to finish. It's a great way to finish. No, what I would like to know, I'd like to know actually, what's next for Konnector? What are the ambitions? I mean, obviously, I think you've got through COVID reasonably well. I understand.
We've been blessed.
Okay.
We're very, very lucky that in time, this is built with a recession in mind. Okay. When people haven't got massive budgets, they're wanting to take a lot more stuff in-house. So if we can support them in-house at a reasonable rate that's fair for everybody, then, we're going to grow. And we've picked up a lot of project work this year. We're lucky to pick up a government contract this year. So, believe it or not, we have pretty much tripled our turnover this year compared to other years, and actually reduced our overhead. So, we've done incredibly well for what has been a difficult year. It has pretty much broken me, if I'm honest. I've literally come off a 10 days enforced break where I had to go and recalibrate.
Right.
I ended up getting run down and sick, chest infection. I couldn't get the daily exercise in, and that starts messing with your head.
Yeah.
But it has given me that opportunity to look at that future, and it really is going to be, again, built on the foundation of the success of those that we work with. And, the next year and the year after, where I'm really going to focus on is not just our one-to-one coaching program, but, how can we actually leverage relationships, leverage joint ventures, and, how can we actually offer value at scale? Because one-on-one, I love and I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
But it's not going to impact as many businesses as I want to. So there are a few little projects that I've got in the background bubbling away where I'm looking at supercharging the impact that we can have on many, many more businesses.
That's a much better way to finish, right? Much better. Listen, thank you so much for your time, Glenn. I really, really appreciate it. It's been great to chat with you. Thanks a lot.
As always, love taking the time to spend with you, buddy.